Hello and welcome to this presentation titled Best Practices in Business-to-Business Debt Collection. This is another program in the 10-minute tip series of presentations for credit and collection professionals. My name is Michael Dennis. I'll be the presenter today. Let's begin with an introduction. Business-to-business debt collection requires appropriate and timely activities by collectors intended to collect past due balances sooner rather than later, while at the same time maintaining as much customer goodwill as possible. Effective business-to-business debt collection involves and requires efficient and effective interactions between the creditor and the debtor, and more specifically, between the creditor company's collectors and the debtor companies. The goal of the collector is to secure a reasonable and realistic payment commitment from each customer they contact. Effective debt collections will necessitate regular follow-up to ensure that customers make and then keep the commitments that they make. Collectors should be aware that they will be more effective if their collection activities are consistent, and ideally, the consistency will result in the situation that when a customer account becomes past due, that delinquent customer will expect a call from the collector. Best practices in business-to-business debt collection. To collect outstanding invoices more quickly, please consider implementing these best practices. Number one, create a written training program for new collectors. In my opinion, on-the-job training is fine as far as it goes, but if you rely exclusively on on-the-job training for new collectors, what the new collector learns is all of the good habits of the trainer as well as all of the bad habits of the trainer. The written collection training program should address things including collection basics, how to resolve disputes, and how to prioritize as it relates to collection-related activities. Best practices in collections tells us that we should recognize and reward top collection performers. Best practices dictate that we monitor collectors' performance, and ideally, monitoring performance includes giving collectors the ability to track their own progress against their monthly goals on an ongoing basis. In addition, collection targets may need to be customized. For example, if you only have two collectors and one is responsible for domestic collections and the other is responsible for international collections, it may not be appropriate to have the same collection targets for those two collectors. Therefore, it may be the case that your collection targets should be customized. Don't expect and don't rely on written correspondence to generate the fastest response in connection with past due invoices. My recommendation is to communicate with customers, not correspond with customers. And finally, try to address past due balances promptly. And more specifically, remember to inform customers of the consequences of not paying invoices on time or not paying them at all. Best practices continued. Collectors need to prioritize outbound collection calls in descending dollar value past due, and that applies irrespective of the age of the invoices in question. Fundamentally, what I'm saying is that a collector should be able to identify the customer that they are responsible for with the largest past due balance, and they should be instructed to contact that customer first, and the second largest past due balance second, etc. Collectors will be more effective and more efficient if they learn how to properly address customer complaints or the justifications that customers use for late payment. The collector should always expect and request or require payment in full of the entire past due balance. The credit department, and specifically the collectors, should be in a position in which they are invited and encouraged to document internal problems within the creditor company that tend to result in customers taking deductions or alternatively result in customers withholding payments. Specifically, the credit department should track on an ongoing basis the number and the dollar value of open deductions, as well as the frequency and the types of customer deductions being taken, in addition to the impact of those deductions on the company's AR as well as on DSO. Best practices continued. Try to make sure as a manager or a supervisor that each collector is handling a manageable number of accounts. And if that is not the case, then the manager is going to need to do something different. It may be that the manager will simply reallocate accounts such that the workload becomes more manageable. It may also be the case that reallocation is not a viable solution, at which point the manager may need to suggest or recommend to management that the department increase its collection staff. Best practices dictate that we need to be consistent in our collection efforts. In addition, we need to be sure that exactly one person has primary responsibility for each account, for each past due balance, for each outstanding and past due invoice. We should also flag high-risk accounts. Those high-risk accounts will require regular reviews in terms of the credit limit assigned, and they'll require more careful scrutiny by the collector because they tend to become past due more often and they're more difficult to collect on when they become past due. As a department, you should set a time limit after which a delinquent account might be placed with a third-party collection agency for collection. That time limit might be 180 days, it might be 365 days, but at some point, every account ought to be eligible after a certain number of days of delinquency for placement with a third party for collection. Another best practice is to create a team to discuss complex collection-related issues and to offer suggestions, ideas, proposals, recommendations, tools and tips, or alternatives for the collector when they run into a complex collection issue. Recognize that the longer the credit department waits before they call a customer that has become past due about a past due balance, the more likely it is the customer in question will think that your company is indifferent about payment of that outstanding balance. Please encourage and instruct collectors not to hide problems and for them not to hold on to problem accounts. This is an important one. We should shorten or eliminate grace periods before calling delinquent accounts to inquire about the status of a past due invoice. As a consultant, what I often find is that collectors wait X number of days. Then they might tell me, I'm waiting 10 days to give the customer a chance before I pick up the phone and call the customer to discuss a past due invoice. The problem with that is grace periods before making the initial call benefit only the delinquent customer. They don't benefit the creditor company in any way. And so my recommendation fundamentally is eliminate grace periods and call as soon as possible once an account becomes past due. Train collectors that their role in discussions with delinquent customers is as a negotiator, not as a note taker. Also, train collectors to focus on both the quantity and the quality of interactions with customers. If all they're focusing on is quantity, then they're going to rush through discussions. They're more likely to accept the first offer the customer makes. And unfortunately, that is not an optimal outcome for the credit department. Best practices dictate that we try not to leave voicemail messages except as a last resort. And if you as a collector must leave a voicemail message, please make the call exceptional. Why? Because the typical customer's accounts payable clerk receives far more calls than she or he is likely to be willing or able to return on any given day. So what those accounts payable team members do is they prioritize. And not surprisingly, they prioritize based on the call and the message that they receive. Does it sound important? If the answer is no, then they're not likely to return the call. If it's yes, then they are far more likely to return that voicemail message that you've left. So let me illustrate very simply with two different voicemail messages. So the typical one that I hear sounds a lot like this. Hey, this is Michael. I'm calling with XYZ. Give me a call when you get a chance to discuss your account. Here's my phone number. Thank you. Goodbye. So that's number one. And that I would suggest is anything but an exceptional voicemail message. Now let me contrast that with an exceptional message. So this is the second one. Hello, this is Michael Dennis. I'm calling with the XYZ company. It's urgent and important that I hear from you as quickly as possible. When you get this message, please call me immediately. It's exceptionally important that we speak today about your account. I'm going to give you my number a couple of times, so as soon as you get this message, please give me a call. It's really important. Here's my number. As you can see, the second message is distinctly different than the typical message that AP departments receive, and therefore it's the message they're likely to return. Thank you for your time today. By the way, if you're interested in hearing the entire 1-hour presentation on this topic, please contact the Sponsoring Credit Association for more information about the on-demand program. Have a great day.